Well, hello. Today we're going to buy a house. Well, not really, but we're going to look at some of the things that go into buying a house. Now, this topic is so big and so broad. The video is already very long, I'm sure. If you look and see, it's lengthy, and I'm sorry, but there is just so much to talk about, and honestly, it's one of my favorite things to talk about because this is a giant investment. Most people spend, half their life paying off a house, which is very unfortunate, but it also creates a really good store of wealth for your retirement so that when you might not need as big of a house, maybe when you're getting closer to retirement, you have a four-bedroom house that you are raising kids in, maybe then you can sell it and you have some really good money for retirement. There's a lot of things you should be investing in, and you know what? Maybe buying a house isn't for you. There are a tremendous number of pros and cons for buying a house, or not buying a house. I guess con. Um, but anyways, you can search that up if you're not sure about that. We could make lists together. But just Google search pros and cons of buying or buying versus renting, things like that. We could make a list with 20 things on each one of them, I'm sure. So with that, let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to talk about buying a house. We're going to go through one full example today, and then you guys can work on some of this on your own. Um, okay, so what we're going to be focusing on is when you go to buy a house, how much is the house going to cost? Can you afford it? How much are you going to actually end up paying? Because that's different than the cost of the house. Okay, the cost of the house and how much you pay are different, and that has to do with interest, and then also some other things that you have to buy with the house. And then we are going to talk about a few other options. We're going to focus primarily on what's called a conventional loan. It's conventional because it's what a lot of people do. But there are a lot of different types of loans, and we will talk about some of them at the end of the video. So the whole video, for the most part, is talking about um, conventional loan, but if you want an adjusted rate loan or a VA if you're a veteran or FHA if you're a first-time home buyer or you can't afford a down payment, there's some government assistance. We'll talk about all that at the end of the video. Now, just because I know many of you aren't going to take the time to go and actually Google search pros and cons, I just made a quick little list here. These are some lists that I've come up with, and then also, students have added in and other people who own homes. So just a quick little recap of what some of this is. And this is the pros and cons of owning a home, and I didn't do this in terms of owning versus renting, but you can typically think of a con for owning a home may typically be written as a pro for renting a home. So I just stuck with owning a home. Pros, cons. Pro, typically it's a very good investment. If you look at home prices over the years, home prices have consistently gone up. There was a time in 2008 when home prices dropped off significantly for a short time, but within a few years, the majority of the value of the home was back. Not all of it, but within a couple years, a lot of the value of those homes had come back. Um, in the long run, it will be cheaper than renting because at some point your payments drop off and you can live in your house and then you're not ever paying rent. Whereas if you're renting your whole life, even when you're 65 years old, you're still paying a rent. The other thing about that is rent can go up over time. Your mortgage payment will not if you have a conventional loan. So if you're paying $1,000 right now for your mortgage, 23 years from now, you're still paying $1,000. Whereas 23 years from now, if you're renting, I guarantee your rent will go up just due to inflation. So owning a home is cheaper in the long run. Now, obviously, I have some bias. Like, I'm a big fan of owning a home. I think it's great, but it really isn't for everyone. Okay. Um, it provides some stability for the family. You're going to be living in the same location. People aren't going to come and tell you, hey, we're going to change this from rental units into condos, so you have to get out. Like if once you own your home, you own it. There are some tax breaks for it. You can redecorate anytime you want. You can paint. You can knock out any walls you want as long as they're not load-bearing walls. You don't have landlords coming in to check on you. It does help to improve your credit score when you're making regular payments. You can own animals at your house, and depending on the neighborhood and what the city ordinance is, you can have lots of different kinds of animals. And then ultimately, the thing that I talked about is it's building equity and saving for retirement. You'll have a lot of money, probably. If you've paid off your house, whenever you go to retire, you can sell your house and probably make a significant amount more. Okay. Um, there are some cons. You have to keep up with your own maintenance. Typically, whenever you're renting an apartment or a house, you might have a landlord who takes care of the maintenance for you. You could have an HOA. It's a homeowners association. Many people, although homeowners associations were originally designed to try to benefit the homeowners, a lot of people do not like HOAs. They do help retain home value, and you can research on what they are, but it's really just kind of like it's almost like a little miniature government over you and your neighbors on what your houses can look like and some things that you need to do. A lot of people have very negative experiences with homeowners associations, but the HOAs do typically help the neighborhood to retain the value of the homes. So if you work for an HOA and you're like, hey, he's bad-mouthing HOAs. No, like I'm just saying I've had some negative experiences, but I also know that they keep the values of the homes higher. It makes it so that you can't have one or two houses in the neighborhood that just never mow their lawn. The house is in complete disrepair. They're always parking 12 different things all over the streets and in front of neighbors, and it just kind of it's just almost like a little organization to try to keep everyone in line, and then that keeps home values higher. Okay. If you buy a house and you don't like your neighbors, you are stuck with them until you move or your neighbors move. So that's another con. You do have to pay insurance on your house. Now, typically when you're renting, you'll have renter's insurance, but it's a lot harder to just pick up and move if you own. If you're renting, hey, when your lease comes due, you just don't re-sign it, and then you can walk away scot-free. But with a home, you have a lot more responsibility. You have to either sell it, or have someone else take care of it. Now, another thing you could do is you could ultimately rent it out. There's some people that will buy a home and then maybe they feel like moving, and so they keep their home and then they rent it out. They use an extra service, either like Airbnb or VRBO. I know they want to be called Vrbo, but that's ridiculous. Sorry, VRBO. You're stuck with VRBO for me. I have some friends too that they make pretty decent money on a house using these short-term rental agreements, using those extra services. So those are some pros and cons. Let's now get going here on this. Okay, so a mortgage is a long-term loan. Typically, it's going to be 30 years. 15 years is not all that uncommon, but most people can't afford it in 15 years. They need to spread it out over longer. So a mortgage specifically, though, is one in which you're going to be buying a house. Okay, you're going to be buying some property. You're going to be buying a house, and that house is going to be the collateral. It's the security for the distance between the down payment and the sale price. All that means is that if you can't make your payments, the bank is going to take your house back. See, if you just borrow money from a bank, you just go into the bank and take out $10,000, that's fine. But if you go and you spend that $10,000 in Las Vegas and can't make your payments to the bank really doesn't get anything out of it. And so those will typically have higher interest rates because it's a little bit more risk for the bank to just give a cash loan. If you get a loan to buy a car, you can sometimes get rates that are a little bit lower than that, because if you don't make your payments, then the bank actually gets a car back. They can get something out of it. And then mortgages, you're going to have some of the lowest rates, because if you can't make your payments, well, the bank ultimately at least gets a house out of the deal, and then they can sell that house and hopefully recoup some of the costs. But just make your payments and then you're good. Now, that's easier said than done. I realize some hardships happen and people lose jobs or markets crash, and all kinds of things happen, and I know, I get it. Okay, but a down payment. A down payment is the amount of cash that the buyer pays right up front. Now, typically, it could be, it could be 90% of the value, but probably not going to be that. Typically, 20% is what conventional loans require, a 20% down payment. It could be down to 5%. 20% is a nice little amount because it prevents you from having to pay some extra fees that are called private mortgage insurance, or PMI. But maybe it's only 5%, maybe it's, whatever it is. See, the thing you got to realize is if you're trying to buy a $200,000 house, and if you want to put down, 5% of $200,000, that's actually quite a bit of money, right? I mean, like, that's $10,000. So $10,000 is manageable, especially if you're trying to buy a first house. You need to have some kind of a down payment. But what's hard is this 20%. 20% of $200,000 is is $40,000. So if you want to buy a house and put down 20%, you've got to have $40,000, and that's kind of tough. So a lot of people don't actually put down 20% anymore, especially for first-time home buyers. A lot of times for when you buy your second or third home, hopefully you'll have, you're a little bit more mature in your job. You probably have raises. Maybe you made some money selling your first house. And a lot of times when people buy a second or third house, they do have the 20% to put down. I know that was the case for me. I happened to buy my first house in 2010, and the market was down. And then I was able to sell that house a few years later, and we moved into a different one, and I was able to make enough money that I could put 20% down on the new house, and that means I didn't have to pay PMI anymore, private mortgage insurance. Okay. Conventional loans have what are called fixed interest rates. Now, right now, our interest rates are very, very low. I'm recording this in 2020, of course. And so our interest rates are very low. You should definitely get fixed interest rate loans because they're not going to go much lower. They could, but probably not. There are other things called adjustable rate loans. Okay, adjustable rate mortgage, sometimes they're called ARMs, A-R-M. And what that means is you're going to get locked in at some interest rate, and you're going to pay that for some period of time. Maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 5 years, who knows? I mean, well, you would know because it's in the terms of the loan. If you're only going to live in a place for, you're only going to live there for 2 or 3 years. Well, if you're only going to live there 2 years, probably renting is a better idea. But if you know that you're going to be limited and you want to buy a house, getting an adjustable rate loan isn't the worst thing because usually they have a little bit lower interest rates than conventional loans right up front. They're a little bit lower interest, but they do adjust. They change over time. And the terms of the loan will state how often they can change. But you might get an interest rate at 3.5%, and then 2 years later, maybe that goes up to 3.75%. And 2 years after that, maybe it goes up to 4%. And 2 years after that, maybe it's 4.25%. And, and there is a limit. There is a cap on these usually. They might cap it at 5%. But the hard part about this is as these interest rates go up, your payment will also go up. And so the nice part about a conventional loan with that fixed rate is once you see that payment, that is your payment for the next 30 years. Or however long you take the loan out, and you can bank on it, no pun intended. All right, so there's a process called closing, and it just means that's the end process. There's a bunch of closing cost fees that are associated. So when you want to go buy a house, if you have if you have your $20,000 that you're ready to put as a down payment, just to say, man, their closing costs get to be expensive. So, you might be spending $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 just in closing costs. So there's a reason why there's so many real estate agents around. It's because they get a percentage. The people writing the loan get paid. You've got a lot of stuff that you have to pay whenever you go to buy a house. So don't think that just because you've saved up $20,000, you're like, yay, $20,000, that's my down payment. Because a lot of the fees are going to get taken out of there. I think, with my personal experience, I think with my first house, I had almost $30,000 saved up, and I was like, yes, this is going to be great. I'm going to get a huge chunk paid off. And then after all the fees, I think I only ended up with about $15,000 that went actually toward the house. The rest of it got taken by everyone involved, and everyone, they all got to do their job. So I was paying for their services, but yeah, realtor fees and loan origination and all the inspections and title and document fee. Like there's a ton of fees involved. Okay. All right. So there's something called points. Now, I know a lot of times points are thought of as really good in basketball, football, yeah, you want points. And, points on your driver's license are bad. If you get a point, because you got a speeding ticket or something, you get too many points, your insurance goes up, or you can lose your license. Here, points are typically, they're optional. And what it is considered prepaid interest. And what happens is 1 point is equal to 1% of the loan amount, not the selling price of the house, 1% of how much money you're going to borrow. So you pay that right up front, but in doing so, you actually get a little bit lower interest rate. If your interest rate was going to be 3.5% and you buy a point, then your interest rate might be 3.25%. So it brings down your interest rate, but you pay that interest right. You pay that, it's a fee, and it's right up front. There are some advantages to points. We're not going to get too much into them. I'll show you a little bit of an example in a minute on some benefits of that. But that's really something that you would discuss with your mortgage broker. You would talk to them and they would ask you some questions and they'll help you decide whether or not you should buy points or whether you have to buy points. So let's get into it and let's start doing some problems. I know that we're 15 minutes, 16 minutes in, and we're just now getting started on some actual problems. I'm sorry, but there's just so much involved and a lot of background information here. So Patty and Marshall are going to buy a house for $249,000. They plan to obtain a loan from the bank, and the bank says you need to put down a 15% down payment. And then you also are going to buy 2 points. So let's get this figured out. Okay, 15% down payment. Remember, 15% will be 0.15. And we think of this as 15% of the selling price. And hopefully you've done enough math in your life to know that of means multiply. So we're going to take 0.15 times the selling price of $249,000. Okay, so you'll do that in your calculator. We're going to take 15%, $249,000. $37,350 would be the down payment that the bank is going to want. Okay, the bank wants, that's how much that they need to put down as a down payment. So if this is how much they're going to put down as a down payment, then let's go ahead and figure out what their mortgage is. Okay, remember the mortgage is the loan. The mortgage is the loan. The mortgage isn't the house. The mortgage is the loan. That's just a fancy name for a loan amount. Okay, that's just what we call it. Okay, so the mortgage is a loan amount. How much are they going to be borrowing? Well, we know what the selling price of the house is. Selling price was $249,000. We know how much the down payment is. So ultimately, what we're going to do is just subtract those two. The mortgage amount, the loan amount, is $211,650. That is how much they are going to go into the bank, and that's what they're going to ask for as far as their mortgage amount. All right. Now the bank also said that we want you to buy 2 points. Now there's lots of reasons why a bank might suggest you buy points. Buying a point actually does bring down your monthly payment because it lowers the interest rate. So it requires a little bit more money up front, but sometimes the bank will say you need to buy points to get this payment down into something that you qualify for. We'll look at that in a minute. So every point costs 1% of the loan amount or of the mortgage amount. So if the bank wants you to buy 2 points, then this will cost 2% of the loan amount. Again, not the selling price of the house, 2% of the loan amount. So we'll use 0.02 times the loan amount, and that's going to then get us $4,233. So the 2 points are going to cost them this much, and that's payable right up front. It's at closing. That means like before you move in, right? That's not, oh, we're going to spread this out for a while. That's part of all the fees that you have to pay right up front. Now let's take a quick look at an example of what some points might do. So if you have some points, let's say your loan amount is $200,000 and you are not going to buy any points. If your APR is 4.5%, then your monthly payment is going to be a little over $1,000, $1,013.37. But on a $200,000 loan, if you were going to buy 1 point, remember that costs you $2,000. It's 1% of the loan amount. So you have to pay this right up front. This is like a fee. You pay it right up front. It's actually considered prepaid interest, and it is deductible. It goes if you end up filing your taxes in such a way that you itemize, then your points are all deductible right up front. And if I'm wrong about things, I apologize. I'm not, I do the best I can. But the APR would then come from 4.5% down to 4.25%. And as you lower your interest rate, then your monthly payment will go down. Look at this. Your monthly payment is actually $29 less every month for 30 years. I think this was on a 30-year loan. Your payment is $30 less every single month for 30 years just by paying a $2,000 fee right up front. And if you were to buy 2 points, usually they max it out at 2. I'm not sure if you can buy 3 points. You can't just buy like 10 points, but get like a 0% interest rate or something like that. It doesn't work like that. So they do cap out the number of points that you can buy. And if you pay $4,000 right up front, you would get a lower interest rate of 4%, in which case your payment is all the way down here at $954. And this break-even time, that means that after 68 months, you will have saved $4,000. Now, that's like 5.5 years. So ultimately what this means is if you are going to live in a house, live there for 6 years or more, then maybe points are a good idea. Points are a good idea, question mark. The reason I say that is because maybe you plan on refinancing, and if you're going to refinance your loan in 2 or 3 years, then you will have wasted money on points. I know I've been told before, like, oh yeah, you should totally buy points because it lowers your interest rate. But then I said, I'm going to be refinancing in 2 years anyways because I have some life circumstances happening and I will be able to drop the PMI off my loan. And so they said, oh, well, if you're going to refinance your house in 2 years, it's not advantageous to buy points. Okay, so there's a break-even point, and it's usually around 5.5 to 6 years. Whenever if you're buying points or not. Okay, I do want to point this out as well that over the life of a 30-year loan, this $4,000 investment right up front ends up saving you $21,000 over 30 years time. By getting a lower interest rate, you're paying $21,000 less. And this interest rate is so important because the better your credit score is, the lower interest rate you'll get. So having a good credit score is going to automatically get you lower interest rates. Credit score is not a part of this lesson. Please look up credit score. There's so many commercials out now that you can learn about your credit score. You can check in with your credit card, but please take care of your credit score. I was just in at a car dealership just 3 days ago, and I asked them, hey, what would you want me to tell people who are buying cars? And they said number one thing is pay attention to your credit score and start building credit young. Okay, so there's lots of healthy ways of doing that don't put you into debt. You'll get better interest rates and save you a lot of money in the long run. You can see better interest rates on a house save you lots of money in the long run. All right, so back to it. In summary, when Patty and Marshall want to close on the house, they're going to have their down payment and they're going to pay for their points. So this is how much they would write the check to the bank for, and that doesn't include a lot of other fees like loan origination and all kinds of other stuff. So now, banks, you don't get to just go buy any house you want. I mean, you sort of can. Like if you have the cash, you can if it's for sale. But banks will say, you know what? If you want to borrow money from us, there's only so much money that we will loan you. And your payment has to meet certain criteria. So what banks do is they first figure out what your adjusted monthly income is, and then they multiply that by 28%. 28% of the adjusted monthly income equals your maximum payment allowed. Maximum allowed payment. So the bank will figure out what kind of houses you can afford, because they say we will not let you buy a house in which the payment will exceed this certain number, and it's different for everyone. It goes based on how much money you make. Okay. Now the adjusted monthly income is found by taking your gross monthly income, and so the banks will ask for several months worth of statements, or they might even ask for several years worth of tax documents. And then they figure out how much money you make each month, and then they look at what your liabilities are, things that you owe money on. And anything that has more than 10 payments left, those payments get subtracted off from your gross monthly income. They get subtracted off from that. And what you're left with after all those payments are taken off, then that's your adjusted monthly income. They took the gross, they subtracted off payments that you owe. You know, if you bought a car and your car payment's $400 a month, and you still have 3 years left on that, then they're going to subtract those off. Okay, so there we go. Now we're on the right slide. So suppose that Patty and Marshall, their gross income is $72.50. Together, every single month, or on average, over the course of the year, their income before taxes, that's what gross means. That's just like all of the money coming in, is $72.50. Now, what happens is the bank goes through and pulls everything that they owe money to. And so they have 23 more payments of $225 left on their car. Okay, so they still have almost 2 years of payments there. They have 17 more payments on their kids' braces. They paid for the orthodontist, and those are expensive. They bought some furniture, and they're making monthly payments of $45 on that. Now, these next two are kind of interesting, and they can be a little confusing. The monthly property tax on the new house is $165. That is not a debt that Patty and Marshall currently owe. That's just something else to keep in mind that they're going to have to pay eventually. They're also going to have to pay homeowners insurance. Okay, the bank will require that you have insurance on this house, because until you make your last payment, you don't actually own the house. The bank keeps the title. The bank owns the house. They're holding that as collateral. Okay, so they're going to require that you have homeowners insurance. Now, these two things here, these are not debt. They don't owe that to someone yet. They don't owe that until they buy the new house. Because of that, these are not counted against their AMI. Okay, so the bank is going to approve the loan if the total monthly payment of what's called the principal and interest payment, okay, that's P&I, and then plus the property taxes, which you can see we have here, plus the homeowner's insurance. If you add all that together and it ends up being less than or equal to 28% of their adjusted monthly income, then the bank is going to say, yeah, okay, good, you're good, let's do it. If that's not the case, then no good. The bank's going to say this house costs you too much. So let's figure out how much house Patty and Marshall can afford. So Patty and Marshall, their adjusted monthly income is their gross income minus all of their bills, their debts that they owe. So the $7,250, and then we've got to take off the car loan, we've got to take off the braces, and we've got to take off the furniture that they still owe. So notice we didn't subtract off the insurance and the taxes, and okay, we don't do that. So their AMI, adjusted monthly income, is $6,805. Then the bank says, so here's all of the money that is not accounted for on debt. 28% of that is the maximum amount allowed for payment on a house. That's the most that we're going to allow you to pay. So they take this number times 28%, they get $1,905. That means that as long as the house that Patty and Marshall are looking at, as long as their payment comes in under $1,905, then the bank will approve them to buy the house. If their payment came in higher than $1,905, if their payment came in at $1,975, then they have a couple options. They can either put down more money on a down payment, and that would lower the amount they're borrowing, or they might be able to buy, another point or two. They could purchase more points that would get your interest rate down and would maybe then help you to get it down to that amount. Okay, so let's figure out how much this house would cost Patty and Marshall. Here's the mortgage. It's going to be a 30-year loan. It's 4.5% interest. Now, when you go to do this, there's two ways of calculating the payment. One is by using tables. It's a little outdated, but it is still around, and there's a lot of homework problems that still use this table. There's also a formula. If you go and you Google how to you try to calculate a mortgage using Google or using bankrate.com or any one of the other places that will do loan calculations, they all use formulas. They're formulaic. Okay. But let's go ahead and use tables to start with. Okay, in your book, or you can find online, you can find a lot of places, you'll get a table. A table might look something like this. It'll have an interest rate. It'll tell you how long you're going to have the loan out for. We're focusing for the most part on 30 years, but you could do problems for 25 years, 20 years, whatever. And then these are just these numbers over here. These are some multipliers, and we'll see how to use those in a second. But let's go back and look at this. So to determine the total monthly mortgage payment, you're going to take the principal and interest per $1,000. That's what's on that table. Okay, that's the amount. That's the principal and interest paid for every $1,000. And if that's the case, then that just means that we're going to take how much we owe and divide it by 1,000 and multiply. Okay, so I'll show you an example of that here in a second. The other way, and this is the way that I actually prefer doing it, is by using this formula. While it looks a little intense, it's not too bad to put in your calculator. P is principal, that's how much money you're going to borrow. That's the principal amount of the loan. Interest rate is R. N is the number of times that you're compounding, and that will always be 12 because we're talking about monthly payments. Then we're going to use the same number R, and then still N, that's your number of payments. T, this is your time in years. Okay. And you just plug everything in, rate as a decimal. This is our principal. And then this will always be 12 because we're compounding it each month. M is your monthly P and I payment is what it's called. So principal and interest payment. It's an ugly looking I. That's still also an ugly looking I. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look first at using the table. Using a table, sometimes these numbers they'll round these a little bit, and that will cause you to get some answers that are just a little bit different. So if you're doing homework and they say use a table, make sure you use their table. Whatever table it is they give you, make sure you use that one, because each of these, they might be a little bit, maybe they'll be a little bit, have a few more decimals, or maybe they'll only have 3 decimals, and that will change your answer. So use whatever table you're given. Now we're going to take the P&I payment is going to be the amount borrowed. So how much Patty and Marshall borrowed in this case? Their loan amount is $211,650. We're going to divide it by 1,000. It's always 1,000. That's because your table gives you the interest charged per $1,000. This will always be 1,000. Then we multiply that based on our table value. That's what this number is. So I do want to just show you real quick how to find that on our table. 30 years, 4.5%. I would go back to my table, I'd find 30 years, and I go down to 4.5%, and I see that those two intersect right here. That's how I got 5.06685. So that's the number that I'm using when I multiply here. You can see 5.06685. My P&I payment comes out to be $1,072.40. Now remember though, what banks are looking for is your total payment. And that is what has to be, that's what they go by, is it'll be the P&I payment plus taxes plus insurance, and that information was given on a previous slide. So in total, their monthly mortgage payment is going to be $1,352.40. Okay. Now remember that the bank said that as long as Patty and Marshall came in under 1905, as long as they came in under that, the bank would approve their loan. So their payment came in at $1,352. The bank's going to say, yeah, you're definitely good with this. Okay. Now this is using the table. Let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like with a formula. You're just plugging things in, and I would suggest doing the whole top on the calculator, then you do the whole bottom on the calculator and divide the two. Make sure you keep track of every decimal. You still come out with the same answer. Okay, so if your table is accurate enough, you'll get the same answer. But if your table is rounded a little bit, or if the numbers get to be really large, using the formula and using the table might result in slightly different answers. So I would suggest, while this is my favorite way of doing it, if you're doing homework online, a lot of times they say use tables. Okay? So in this case, can they afford it? Yes. Yes, the bank is going to say yes to Patty and Marshall, so they're good. Okay. Now, Patty and Marshall made a 15% down payment. This is just kind of summary, right? They got a 30-year conventional loan of $211,650. That's called the mortgage at 4.5%. They also paid 2 points of prepaid interest, and their monthly P&I payment comes out to be that. Now let's figure out what this house is going to cost Patty and Marshall over the 30 years. So let's think about everything that they're paying. Well, every single month they are going to pay $1,072.40. Every single month for 30 years. So 360, that's just 12 times 30. That's the number of months in 30 years' time. So that means that they will make payments to the bank. Oh, I do want to point out here, this is just P&I, the principal and interest payment. That's this amount. Notice I did not include taxes and insurance. Those don't actually go towards the cost of buying the house. That's just something you have to have. Okay. Also, those can change over the years. Those will not be constant. Insurance is going to go up. Property taxes will probably go up over time. Okay, but we use the P&I payment only, and that is important. Please make note of that. So they will send the bank this much money to actually pay off the loan over the course of this house, over the course of the loan. Now, you got to think about what else did they have to pay in order to buy this house? Well, they gave them some money right up front. Remember, these are just the payments that they're sending in. They gave the bank a lot of money right up front. Remember how much they gave them? A down payment. They gave them almost $40,000 right up front on day one. But you know what? That's not all they gave them, because they also gave the bank, they bought points. Those points are considered some prepaid interest. So that was $4,233 in points. Now, when you add all that up, they end up paying $427,647 for this house. Over 30 years' time, that's how much they paid. Remember, though, the house sold for $249,000. They paid $427,000. Why did they pay almost twice as much for the house? Well, it's because of interest. They had to pay interest on the money they borrowed from the bank. So remember that interest is going to be the total cost of the house, that's what we just found, minus the selling price. And if we subtract those two, we take that $427,647 minus the selling price of the house, the extra money we paid is the interest. So in total, they will have paid $178,000 in interest. And while that sounds like a lot of money, it is, actually. It is a lot. But it's not near as much as if the interest rates were up at like 6% or 7%. I know my parents told me that when they bought their house, the original interest rate on their house was like 15%. I don't even want to run the numbers on how much interest that would be. It would be insane. That would be ridiculous. The other thing to consider is this is a fairly large loan, and it's going to be spread out over 30 years' time. And so you do end up paying a fair amount of interest, but you know, don't think of it. You know, this is actually relatively cheap money. 4.5% is a decent rate. It's probably even better right now. Okay, but this much interest over 30 years' time is how much you would be paying. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting and it's actually quite depressing, to be honest. How much of the very first payment actually goes towards bringing down the principal? So it's like there's a lot of interest that you're paying right up front because you have a huge amount of money that you owe to the bank. And you're making partial payments. Now, we did partial payments in a previous section, so you may want to go back and review that. But what we're going to be looking at is that the bank always pays itself. It pays the interest first. So your principal will be the P&I payment minus how much interest accrues the amount of interest, 1 month's worth of interest. 1 month's worth of interest. So let's figure out how much 1 month's worth of interest is, or specifically the first month. We're going to use simple interest for that. I equals PRT. So I equals principal times rate times time. Remember, our time is 1 month, so that's 1/12. That means that in the first month, $793.69 worth of interest accrues. Just by having this loan out, this $211,000 loan, by you holding on to that money, basically, it's kind of what it means, like when you have a loan out, by you holding on to that money for 1 month's time, $793 worth of interest happens. And you have to pay the interest first. So we're going to take the principal and interest payment minus the interest. There it is. So we're going to go, let's just get rid of that. $1,072.40, that's your P&I payment. And notice that it's P and I. And what we're doing is subtracting off the I. Essentially, we're taking the P and I payment, and we're going to subtract off the I. Well, P plus I minus I actually just equals P. So the amount of your payment that actually goes towards lowering what you owe to the bank is $278.71. That is so depressing, right? You're giving the bank over $1,000, but only less than 300 of it actually goes towards bringing down that $200,000 that you owe. Like the next month, they would say, oh, you paid us $278 towards your loan, so now your loan is actually only $199,721.29. Forgive me if I did that wrong. I didn't check it on a calculator or anything. Okay, so now this is your loan amount. So I want to investigate a little bit at bankrate.com. There's a lot of places you can go to find mortgages. This just happens to be like the first one that comes up, so good on them. Anyways, you can go through and find how much a mortgage will be. So let's just put in some numbers here. Patty and Marshall's house cost $249,000. I put in 15% here for their down payment, 30 years, interest rate of 4.5%. And then what happens is it actually gives a suggestion here on how much the property taxes and the homeowner's insurance will be. And you can see their P&I payment ends up being about $1,072. So this is just an estimate. They don't know that for sure. It depends on the area, a lot of other things. If you click over here on the amortization schedule, though, then what we'll see is a breakdown of every single payment that they're going to make. Now, because, let's see, they say our estimated payoff date will be in 2050. I notice here that they have the payment as $1,072. I'm going to just go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to add 40 cents to every payment just to kind of match up with what we did. It still comes out to be just a little bit off. And that's, for the formulas to figure out, but it'll be okay. It's going to be close enough here. So what ends up happening then, you can see, no, why didn't that go? Let me, it was on here. Oh, that's annual payment. Sorry. Wrong spot. 0 there. We're going to add an extra monthly payment. So every month we're going to pay 40 cents more than what they say. And that is just to make this so that it's $1,072.40. Now you can see that what happens is as time passes, our payment stays the same, but the amount that goes towards the principal is actually going up. That's because our balance, the amount of money we owe the bank, goes down. So as the amount you owe goes down, then the amount of interest also goes down. And if your payment stays the same, but the interest goes down every month, then of course your payment goes up. And we can scroll through here and we can find, like, it takes a long time before our the amount that goes towards the principal actually exceeds the interest. Like when more than half of our payment it goes towards the principal instead of interest. Look, it's all the way down here of November 28th of 2034. So that's 14 years from now is the first time that our principal, the amount going towards the principal, is more than the interest. But then after that, it starts to go pretty quickly. And you can see if I scroll down here all the way to the end, oh, that's why. Let's expand it all the way down. You can see they tell us that we're going to be paying $174,000 in interest. Now, that is a little bit different than what we calculated, but again, like I said, their formulas are probably just a touch different than what we did. There's maybe some rounding issues going on. Your bank will take care of everything for you. But I would suggest these are great tools. You just Google search amortization table, and you can get this, or go to mortgage calculator, anything like that will get you what you need to do, and that will help you out. Okay. All right. Let's get back to it. We're going to wrap up. We've got just a few more minutes left. We're going to talk about a couple other things. That really wraps up the calculation part, and now the rest of this is just a little extra information about some mortgages. Okay, so there's things called adjustable rate mortgages, which I've already talked about, how the interest rates will change over time, and it has to do with a treasury note. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can pause and read this if you want. So that's up to you. I told you this was going to go fast. You guys can Google that stuff if you want some more information on it. The thing I do want to talk about, though, is FHA loan. An FHA loan it allows you to have a much smaller down payment. This changes with time, but as of this recording, it was 3.5% is the down payment that you need, not 20%, not 10%. So that's much more manageable especially for first-time home buyers. This is the Federal Housing Authority, and it's a way that the government tries to make it so that other people can buy houses. Otherwise, they feel like houses might be priced out of range if you have to have a 20% down payment. It's really tough for people to get into a house. They're a little bit more lax on the AGI or the AMI. Okay, the closing cost gets added into the mortgage. That means that you don't have to pay that money right up front, like I did before. And then the thing is, you do have to pay PMI, private mortgage insurance. And anyone who's ever owned a home will tell you, wow, PMI is awful. I hate it. It's not insurance to protect you. Like, you have homeowners insurance to protect it if your house burns down. PMI actually protects the bank, that if you default, then the PMI makes it so the bank doesn't lose out on all of its money. So PMI is just awful, and I hate everything about it, except that I get it and I understand why you need it, but it is what it is. So if you can avoid paying PMI, typically anytime that you're under that 20% threshold, you have to pay PMI. Even on a regular loan, you have to pay PMI on that. You do have to pay a one-time upfront mortgage insurance payment of 1.75% of the loan amount. Okay, so that can be several $1,000s as well, just added in. And then, yeah, so FHA is it's pretty good if you don't have a lot of money but you want to get into a house. The VA mortgage, if you have served, or if you qualify because a spouse served or something like that, first of all, thank you for your service. Secondly, you should get a VA loan. They are much, much better. It's one of the really great things that our government does to try to help out veterans. You actually don't have to have any down payment at all, but if you put down 5%, then the funding fees are reduced. Funding fees, just like it's a fee that you have to pay in order to get the loan. It's a large loan, and so you do have to pay some fees. Even though it's a zero down, there's still fees involved. And so as of this, I had just checked that a little bit ago, and it was if you put down 5%, then those fees are reduced a little. There's things called graduated payment mortgages, and this just means that like the first several years you might have lower payments, and then your payments will go up every few years. And that's because you're probably going to have a better job and you can afford it more later on. There's balloon payments. Basically, it's a much shorter term loan, so you can get the loan for just a few years, and then all of it is due at the time. So a lot less than 30 years. You can also take out a second mortgage. This is less common now. A lot of people will go and they might borrow money against the value of their home. They might take out what's called a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. And so they might do that. That's a little much more common than actually taking out a second mortgage. It's kind of a similar idea, though. Well, I know that this was long, and I'm sorry. I hope it was informational. I hope you found it informative and easy enough to understand. It is a very complicated process buying a house, and that's why there's so many people involved in this. The last advice I would have to you is when you do want to buy a house, make sure you get recommendations from people. Personal recommendations are the best. You are going to be trusting someone with a major, major, major part of your life. And for the most part, the realtors and the loan originators, they're not trying to screw you over. Like they're not going to try to jack up the price of a house on, like, they want to help you out for the most part. And so it's always best to get personal recommendation, though, because then you just feel that much more secure that the people that you're working with really, really do have your best interests in mind. A lot of them do work on recommendations, and so they try to do their very best so they can be recommended. But look out for that. This is a massive, massive undertaking, and find people that you trust to undergo this process. All right, I hope it's helpful. Please Google anything if you question whether something was right or not. I make mistakes, but Google or Siri or whatever, they probably have more up-to-date articles, and things are always changing. So hope this was helpful.